Leclerc lost his father, and in his father's final days, he told him a white lie that he'd signed the contract, but his driving has made it come true.
26 years before reaching that moment, Charles Leclerc was born on those very same streets. And maybe that's why this was never a normal race for him. Because for any driver, winning there is special. But for Leclerc, it was different. It was his home, the place where he grew up, the place where he imagined winning, long before he even knew if he would ever make it to Formula One. But it was also the place that broke his heart the most times, because for years, every time Leclerc seemed close to fulfilling his dream, something happened. A pole position that ended before it even started, a victory that Ferrari let slip away, a race that time and again seemed to take away what he wanted most. And behind all of that, there were two absences that made that race feel even heavier. The memory of his father and that of a friend and role model who never got to see him make it that far. That's why, when Leclerc reached that last lap in 2024, he wasn't just in the race. He was about to win a race. He was about to win on the streets where he was born. After years of frustration, after feeling that his home always took something away from him. And with the memory of two people who had been part of his journey, but who couldn't see him reach that moment. This is the story of the victory that made Monaco cry. The story of the most emotional victory on the streets of the Principality. To understand why that race carried so much weight, we have to go back to where it all began, to the Principality, but not the Monaco. From the yachts, the cameras, and the celebrities, to the Monaco of Charles Leclerc. The Monaco of a boy who grew up watching as, once a year, the streets of his city stopped being ordinary streets and turned into the most famous circuit in Formula One. The same streets he walked on, the same streets he saw every day, the same streets where he began to imagine a life that still seemed impossible. Because Leclerc wasn't born far from the dream he wanted to achieve. He was born into it. While other drivers saw Monaco as a legendary race, Charles saw it as the place where he grew up. For others, winning there meant making history. For him, it meant winning at home, and that made everything weigh on him differently. The pressure, the expectation, the fear of failing, and also the desire to prove that one day those streets could be his. Because winning in the Principality meant more than just another Formula One victory. It was about making the dream come true of a boy who grew up so close to that Grand Prix, he couldn't help but picture himself in it one day. Leclerc's path to Formula One didn't just start at a very young age. One of the people who supported him the most was his father, Gervais. He was part of that dream from the beginning. He saw him grow. He saw him race. He saw him chase after it. A career that for most kids seems too far away to become a reality. But on that path, there was also another very important presence. Jules Bianchi, a Formula One driver, a friend, a role model, and for Leclerc, almost like an older brother. Jules was already in the world Charles dreamed of reaching. He had made it to Formula One, was racing with Marussia, was part of the Ferrari orbit, and for many, he seemed destined to wear red one day. But unfortunately, that path was cut off too soon. In 2014, Bianchi suffered a very serious accident at the Japanese Grand Prix. And in 2015, after 9 months in a coma, he passed away at just 25 years old. At that time, Leclerc was not yet in Formula One. He was still moving up, still in the lower categories, trying to make his way to the same place that Jules had already reached, but never finished at Ferrari. And that made Charles's dream carry even more weight. Because now, he was no longer trying to get there just for himself, but he was also following the path that Jules left unfinished. Over the following years, that dream moved forward step by step, first in karting and then in lower categories. And it was in GP3, where he began to show that his name could go much further than just the Principality. Each category was one step closer, each victory made Formula One stop seeming like a fantasy. Each season turned that dream, shared with his father and marked by Jules, into something more and more attainable. That's how he became GP3 champion, and in 2017 reached Formula 2. That was the last step before reaching Formula One, the place where he had to prove he was ready to compete with the best. But just when the most important door of his career was starting to open, he was hit with the hardest blow of his entire life. His father was seriously ill, and before he passed away, Charles made a decision that spoke volumes about what that dream meant to both of them. He told him. He said that he had already signed his contract to get into Formula One, something that wasn't true. He didn't have it yet, but he told him that to give him peace of mind so his father could let go, believing that all that effort, all those years, and all those sacrifices had been worth it. And even though it wasn't true at that moment, Charles ended up making it a reality. He won Formula 2, made it to Formula 1, made it to Ferrari, and suddenly, that boy who had grown up watching the cars go by on the streets near his home was no longer watching history from the outside, but was now a part of it. But there was something that neither Jules nor his father could see. They never got to see him debut in Formula 1 or wear Ferrari's colors. That's why every time Leclerc returned to the Principality, that race felt different. Because he wasn't just racing in front of his people, he was racing with the memory of his father and Jules. And that's exactly why Monaco was priceless to him. But before we continue, if you're enjoying this video, subscribe. Does it motivate Ferrari? It didn't make Monaco any easier. On the contrary, it made everything much heavier. He was no longer just the boy from the Principality dreaming of racing those streets. Now he was a Ferrari driver. Now he had the car, the talent, and the opportunity to win the race he had dreamed about his whole life. But every time he seemed close, something went wrong. And the strangest thing is that this story didn't start with Leclerc at Ferrari, but much earlier, in 2017, when he was still in Formula 2. Leclerc had already secured pole position in Monaco, but everything ended too soon, with retirements in both races that weekend. A year later, in his first Monaco Grand Prix in Formula 1, he couldn't finish either. This time, it was a brake failure with Sauber that caused him to lose control and sent him into Brendan Hartley at the chicane.
I've been told that looking back, there's a problem, right? Oh my goodness.
Now, what did Leclerc do? He really did have a problem. Then, in 2019, already wearing Ferrari colors, the story repeated itself. A bad decision by the team knocked him out in Q1. Because of that, he had to start from the back, and no matter how hard he tried to recover, he ended up damaging the car and retiring again. In 2020, there wasn't even a race, but when Monaco returned to the calendar, the story repeated itself. It came back even crueler, because in 2021, Leclerc took pole, and for a moment, it seemed like his dream was about to come true. Because Ferrari didn't have the best car of the season, but in Monaco, that mattered much less. Charles had done the hardest part, putting the car first on the circuit, where starting ahead can be worth half a victory. But unfortunately, that pole was over before it even began, because in the final minutes of qualifying, Leclerc crashed into the wall again.
Leclerc crashed at the end, and he's going to keep the pole because this is going to end.
The crash damaged the car. Ferrari thought they could repair it, and for hours, the hope stayed alive. Until Sunday came, during the formation lap, when everything was supposed to start, the car failed and Leclerc couldn't even start. He stayed in the pits, couldn't start.
Oh, the gas box, guys. I can't imagine what Charles Leclerc is thinking.
The race he dreamed of winning since he was a child slipped away before the lights even went out. And if 2021 was cruel, 2022 was much worse. Because this time, Leclerc took pole position again. He had the race in his hands again. He put Ferrari in first place at home again. He felt again that maybe this time, the Principality would finally stop breaking his heart. However, the race got complicated with the rain, the overtakes, and the typical chaos of a Grand Prix, where any mistake comes at a very high price. In addition, Ferrari made a strategic blunder.
And box now, box for... Out, stay out, fuck, why not if I can do?
Because of that, Leclerc lost the position that had cost him so much to get by taking pole, fell behind his rivals, and a victory that seemed to be his slipped away. The worst part is that he not only lost first place, but he ended up fourth, off the podium, at home, after starting from pole. And in 2023, the story didn't change much either. This time, there wasn't a squandered pole position or a victory that slipped away, but it was still another race without real chances. Leclerc qualified third, but he received a 3-place penalty and ended up starting 6th on a circuit where a bad starting position ruins the whole Sunday. Once again, Monaco found a way to keep him from victory. And that's when everything started to feel like more than just bad luck. Because it wasn't just any race slipping away from him. It was the race he wanted to win the most. The race where he was with his people. The race that carried the memory of his father and Jules. The race where every defeat hurt more because it happened on the very streets where it all began. That's why, when the Monaco Grand Prix came around again in 2024, the question wasn't just whether Leclerc could win, the question was whether he could break his curse, and if 2024 would finally be different. Then 2024 arrived. Monaco again, Ferrari again, Leclerc once more, with the chance to win the race he had been chasing his whole life.
But this time, the feeling was different.
Because Charles already knew what it was like to be close. He already knew what it was like to take pole at home. He already knew what it was like to feel that he could finally win and then watch everything fall apart too soon. That's why, when he went out to qualify again in 2024, he wasn't just fighting against his rivals, he was also fighting against all those memories. Against 2021, against 2022, against every time the Principality had taken something from him. And even so, Leclerc did what he had to do again. He was the fastest, got the pole position, and once again put himself in the exact spot where he had wanted to be so many times. First in Monaco, in front of his home crowd with Ferrari.
It was no longer just the race he wanted to win most, but the one he needed to win. But this time, the pole didn't work. It didn't just feel like a celebration, it felt like a test.
Because on any other circuit, starting first is an advantage. But in Monaco, starting first can also become an unbearable pressure. Not only because everyone expects you to win, but because Leclerc already knows what happens when that chance slips away. And that's why, after getting pole position, the question wasn't just whether he had the pace to win. The question was whether this time he could survive his own history. If this time Ferrari wouldn't fail. If this time the car would hold up. If this time Monaco would finally let him fulfill his dream. And then Sunday arrived. Leclerc had already done the hardest part, getting pole position. But after everything he had experienced on that circuit, starting first wasn't enough. Because Charles knew that in the Principality, races aren't only lost when someone overtakes you on the track. They can also be lost because of a strategy, a mechanical problem, a red flag, a tiny mistake, any detail that on another circuit might be fixable. But not in Monaco. There, any mistake could become a death sentence. And the race started with tension from the very first moment. Leclerc held on to the lead at the start, but almost immediately, chaos broke out.
Checo's car wasn't just a little erratic. Something happened to him. He was zigzagging for a reason.
Yeah. It was like he accelerated and the car slid a bit, and a big crash on the first lap brought out the red flag, stopped the race, and put everything on hold again. And for any other driver, that might have just been an interruption. But for Leclerc, it was a warning sign.
Because with his history in Monaco, every unexpected event seemed to have the potential to become a new way to lose it all. But this time, Leclerc didn't break.
After the restart, he didn't need to have a spectacular race. He didn't need to pull away by 20 seconds or prove he was the fastest on every lap. He needed something much harder for him: control.
Not to go for a heroic drive, but to survive the pressure of knowing that any mistake could ruin the moment he had waited for his whole life.
From the outside, it might have looked like a calm race. But for Leclerc, every lap brought him one lap closer to fulfilling his dream.
And one more lap for the Principality to find a new way to snatch it away. That's why the race felt so long.
Not because it was full of overtakes, nor because there were constant battles for the lead, but because every meter seemed to carry the weight of all the previous years. His father's promise, the memory of Jules, the frustration of having been so close so many times. And as the finish line got closer, the question grew bigger and bigger.
Could he do it this time?
Then came the final lap, the same lap you saw at the beginning of the video. But now, it wasn't just Leclerc approaching the finish line. It was everything that had led to that moment. The boy who grew up on those streets, the driver who had seen that race slip away from him time and time again, the 2021 pole that ended before it even started, the disaster of 2022, the frustration of 2023.
His father's promise, the memory of Jules. Everything was there in those final meters. And that's why, when Leclerc entered the last sector, he wasn't just finishing any race.
He was closing a story that had taken 26 years to reach that point.
This is going to be something special for Charles Leclerc. His career might have ended without the intervention of the late Jules Bianchi, who told Ferrari, "You have to take this kid. You have to make sure he gets to Formula One." And what a gift that was to give. In 2017, Charles Leclerc lost his father, and in his last days, he told him a white lie that he had signed the contract. But now he's driving. And for the first time, this famous race is won by one
of their own. And this time, nothing happened. There was no mechanical failure. There was no ruined strategy. There was no bad luck.
This time, Leclerc crossed the finish line first. And in that moment, everything he had carried for years came out all at once.
We won! We won! Finally!
The tension, the frustration, the pressure of racing at home, the memory of those who couldn't see him make it that far. Because he hadn't just won a Grand Prix.
He had won the Monaco Grand Prix, his race, at home. The race that had broken his heart the most times. And finally, it was giving something back to him. Because for years, Monaco had taken away races, poles, opportunities, and moments that seemed written for him.
But in 2024, Charles finally fulfilled that dream. And not just his own. Also, his father's and Jules'. That's why this victory didn't feel like just another one. It felt like the day Charles Leclerc stopped chasing the race of his life and finally achieved it. That was the victory that made Monaco cry. The most emotional victory on the streets of the Principality. And if you like this video, subscribe.